All right. Welcome, everyone. We can get started. Thank you for joining us for this session, Measuring the Impact of Housing Revitalization Projects in Connecticut Cities. And thank you also for joining us during this conference, Tipping Point Connecticut's first affordable housing conference series. Some of you have been on sessions with us already, but we have over 30 sessions that we are hosting this week that feature local, state, and national experts. And we really invite you to join the conversation by following us at PSC Housing or tweeting us #TippingPoint2020. Before I turn it over to our presenters, I just want to take a moment to thank our leading sponsors, the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority and the Melville Charitable Trust. I also want to thank our collaborating sponsor, Connecticut Department of Housing, and supporting sponsors, Housing Enterprises, Inc. and Whittlesey. And we have a session sponsor, the Capital Region Development Authority. And we thank all of these sponsors. We would not be able to put on this conference without their generous support. Before we get started, I just want to note a couple housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and will be made available to all participants following the session as soon as possible. All participants have been entered muted. Please remain on mute unless the presenter asks you to come off of mute. And if you have any technology issues, please use the chat function at the bottom in your Zoom panel control. You can direct any questions towards me. I'm in the meeting as PSC Zoom meetings too. Or you can reach out to Kaylee. Gabby will let you know how she would like her questions to be asked. There's either a way to put them in the chat function at the bottom of the screen or to raise your hands. And a few minutes before the end of the session, you will see two surveys. One will pop up on your screen that asks about feedback for this particular session. And then we will also, we'll share a survey to learn more about the affordable housing needs in Connecticut. And we ask that you please take a moment to complete that if you haven't done so already. So I am excited to introduce Gabby Nelson. Gabby, take it away.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here today. I am going to be presenting on research that I did this past summer on housing revitalization by CDCs in Connecticut cities. But I know many of the folks on here have a lot they could contribute to this research. So I'm really hoping that we can have a discussion and I can learn something from you all too that we can add into future iterations of the research or put in the queue for other Trinity research projects. I'm going to start sharing my screen in just a second. But before I do, I'm pasting a link in here to the full report if you want to follow along in there or take a look at it later. Okay, let me see. All right. Okay, so this project is this project came out of a summer research project advised by Professor Sean Fitzpatrick at Trinity. I'm Gabby. I'm the Assistant Director of Urban Engaged Learning at Trinity College, and I'm also a graduate student in the Master's in Public Policy program at Trinity. The research question for this project was, what are the outcomes of Community Development Corporation housing revitalization programs in Hartford and New Haven, looking at key indicators of neighborhood stability, including property values, owner occupancy rates, vacancy rates, and street conditions. The three CDCs studied for this research were SINA and NINA in Hartford and NHS in New Haven. Some quick facts about each of the 3 CDCs are listed out here. One key difference to note starting off is that SINA and NINA each have institutional partners and NHS does not. So SINA and NINA target their investments surrounding their institutional partners in the neighborhood surrounding their institutional partners, whereas NHS works in several clusters throughout the city of New Haven. So they are a bit more spread out throughout New Haven, whereas SINA and NINA are working around their institutional partners. I do have a map in here that I'll pull up in a couple of slides. And here there's a list of some of the different programs that each of the CDCs engages in. For this project, I was specifically focused on their home building and home rehabilitation programs. On this slide, we have some examples of the home building and rehabilitation programs of each of the 3 CDCs. So SINA focuses on building new 1 to 2 family homes on vacant lots in the area surrounding its institutional partners. SINA has a number of other programs as well, but this program was the focus of this research. NINA's focuses on renovating historic homes in the Asylum Hill neighborhood, and NHS focuses on renovating homes to historic standards in clusters across New Haven. Here's a map on the left of Hartford and on the right of New Haven. In Hartford, the more northern cluster there are the homes renovated by NINA. In the more southern cluster are the SINA homes. The blue line overlay on here are census tracts. So I used these maps to identify the focus area census tracts for the CDCs, which I abbreviated FACTS in the report. So the focus area census tract for NINA was identified as 1 census tract up in the Asylum Hill neighborhood in Hartford. The focus area census tracts for SINA were identified as 2 census tracts adjacent to its institutional partners in Southern Hartford. Over here, you can see NHS has its homes more spread out throughout the city of New Haven. NHS has done significantly more home renovations since the 70s than SINA or NINA. So I identified 5 census tracts in New Haven that were the NHS focus area. So in total, there were 3 CDC focus area census tracts in Hartford and 5 NHS focus area tracts in New Haven. For research methods, I was looking at median home sale values for the years 2001, 2010, and 2019. I used census data for homeownership rates and vacancy rates. I conducted a virtual windshield survey on Google Maps to observe street conditions. I was looking at the historical view in 2011 and looking for changes to street conditions between 2011 and 2019, specifically looking for changes to landscaping, home maintenance, the presence of graffiti and litter, and also looking for the continued maintenance of the CDC renovated homes. I conducted interviews with CDC leaders to understand the organizational missions and any past research that they have done that could augment the research I was doing. And then finally, for the methods, I worked to determine what the threshold should be for sufficient spatial concentration of investment in order to say that a CDC could have plausibly had an impact in a census tract. So that's a mouthful there, and I'll get more into that later, how I determine sufficient spatial concentration and the importance of sufficient spatial concentration. But I developed a hypothesis of how many structures a CDC has to rehabilitate in a given area in order to expect measurable changes at the census tract level. Here are my findings in a snapshot, and next I'll go through each of these findings individually. But as a snapshot, Hartford and New Haven have advantages compared with other former industrial cities. That is one piece of good news that we can feel good about. On the less good news side, there was little improvement in home ownership across any of the focus area census tracts. There were improvements in property values in some neighborhoods, improvements in street conditions in most neighborhoods, And then the final finding to focus on, investments must be spatially targeted to see measurable results at the neighborhood level. Okay, starting to move through each of the findings individually. Moving into the advantages of Hartford and New Haven. This finding is a commentary on Alan Malick's divided city and his concept of legacy cities. So I was focusing a lot on Malick in the literature review for this research. And while a lot of Malick's concepts are helpful in thinking about Connecticut cities, Hartford and New Haven do not fit neatly into the category of legacy cities. So legacy cities are what the term Malick uses for formerly industrial cities, largely across the Northeast and Midwest. And so Hartford and New Haven have several key differences between our cities here in Connecticut and other legacy cities across the country. And those differences paint a hopeful picture for Hartford and New Haven. So if we're reviewing literature on formerly industrial cities, we have to take a note of caution with that because yes, there are certain aspects of that literature that can help us as we're working on community development in Hartford and New Haven, but there are aspects of that literature that don't quite fit. So I'll go through some of the specifics of that over the next couple of slides. So first of all, we're geographically small compared with other legacy cities. Hartford and New Haven are each around 20 square miles, and there's some comparisons there to other typical legacy cities. So we're a lot geographically smaller, and that contributes to a geographically induced spatial concentration of investment. So we have that advantage of our investments are already somewhat spatially targeted just by the fact that our cities are geographically small. Another advantage is the overall wealth of the state of Connecticut. The Hartford and New Haven regions are both some of the wealthier metropolitan regions in the country. And each city has neighborhoods that are stable or thriving, which further reduces the geographic area in need of investment and further helps with that spatial targeting. Hartford has a strong insurance industry and educational and healthcare institutions. New Haven also has the advantage of its proximity to New York and Yale University. So this differs from other deindustrialized cities where in some cases all industry and other substantive economic activity have ceased. We have largely retained our core industry here in Connecticut, our core industries. And so we haven't seen the total deindustrialization that has happened in other legacy cities across the country. How does this advantage in Hartford and New Haven translate into the numbers? So Hartford and New Haven both saw property values increase on par with or faster than the state of Connecticut overall. So oftentimes when we're thinking of legacy cities or Hartford and New Haven, we think that property values are declining, which is not necessarily the case. Hartford saw property values increase slightly less than the state of Connecticut overall from 2001 to 2019, but Hartford's property values didn't increase that much less than the state overall, and New Haven's property values vastly outperformed the state of Connecticut overall in terms of property value increases from 2001 to 2019. So that is speaking to the overall strength of New Haven's real estate market. And then looking at vacancy rates, the comparison numbers here come from Alan Malick's report, The Empty House Next Door. If you can't tell, I'm really looking forward to Alan Malick's session in the conference tomorrow because I've studied his work a lot over the recent months. So when we look here, what's particularly striking is if you look at that New Haven vacancy rate from 2018, it's about 11%, which is in line with Sunbelt cities more so than legacy city average vacancy rates. So Sunbelt cities like Miami or Phoenix are also averaging around an 11% vacancy rate. Again, speaking to the overall strength of New Haven's real estate market. And then Hartford would be considered a small legacy city, but just was checking out the chat. Yes, Alan Malick's talk tomorrow. Going to be really interesting. Small legacy cities, yes, Hartford and New Haven would both be considered small legacy cities with populations less than 200,000. And Hartford is falling more in line with the lower large legacy city vacancy rate. The importance of spatial targeting has been documented in the literature. There was one prominent study on measuring the impact of CDBG grant spending in urban neighborhoods and determined that spatial targeting is important in order to see results at the neighborhood level. So it's been documented in the literature, but it also is just makes sense. We can't rehabilitate a handful of houses in a neighborhood with hundreds of housing structures and expect to see a difference in the numbers. You know, if we rehabilitate, you know, a few houses in a neighborhood, there are other benefits to that. We're providing better housing opportunities for those families living there. But for the purposes of measuring results at the neighborhood level, there has to be a significant number of homes rehabilitated in that area for us to measure those results at the neighborhood level. So for this project, in order to determine which census tracts could have plausibly seen a change in these indicators based on CDC activity, I came up with a hypothesis of how much housing has to be rehabilitated by a CDC to see a difference. So I set that hypothesis at 3% based on the maps you saw and my observations in the neighborhoods, but further study would be needed to confirm or modify this threshold. I saw Dean is on this call, and I've got a quote from Dean here that became a bit of a theme for this project. I was emailing with Dean, and I told him that my initial results were showing that there wasn't much change in home ownership, and Dean wrote back and said, it's hard to move the needle on home ownership. And that became something it rang very true as I continued throughout the project. And so that stuck with me. And so I put it up here. As you can see here, owner occupancy decreased across the state of Connecticut and across the United States from 2000 to 2018. So owner occupancy decreased everywhere. So the CDCs have an uphill battle to fight there in increasing owner occupancy. I mean, this is a really tough time period to talk about owner occupancy because we had the housing crash right in the middle of this time period. And so owner occupancy decreased everywhere. It decreased all across Hartford and New Haven. Looking at the SINA area, there was a slight increase in owner occupancy. The SINA area is made up of two census tracts. One of the census tracts saw a slight increase, and one of the census tracts saw a slight decrease in owner occupancy. Vacancy rates is residential, just answering a couple questions in the chat. And I'll get to that other question later on. So everything in here is only referring to residential. They're only including residential structures in all of these numbers. So Hartford and New Haven overall saw owner occupancy decreases. Right, SINA area. Man, I think I got to stop looking at the chats because it throws off too much. So SINA area, two census tracts, one saw a slight increase, one saw a slight decrease. And then they average out to a slight net positive. So it's possible based on those numbers that SINA has slightly increased, or that the SINA area has seen a slight increase in home ownership over those years, but the numbers are so slight that it's hard to say for sure. But it's definitely fair to say, looking at the numbers as a whole, that there was little, if any, improvement in owner occupancy in the focus areas from 2000 to 2018. So for me, this brings up a couple of questions. So the primary question is, if it's very hard to change owner occupancy rates, should this be the main indicator of CDC housing program success? Are we setting CDCs up for failure if we say that the main goal is to increase owner occupancy, and if that's not happening, and if that's a really hard goal to meet, should that be the main goal? And then a tougher question that I do not pretend to have the answer to, do we need to re-examine the methods of housing revitalization if increasing owner occupancy is the goal? Like, if we're really set on increasing owner occupancy, then are these methods the right methods to use? Again, don't pretend to have the answer to that question, but these numbers bring up those two questions for me here. Moving on to look at property values. Here are the property median home sale values in Hartford. For the time period studied, the census tracts up at the top there with the stars are the CDC focus area census tracts. And so we can see that each of the CDC focus areas saw an increase in property values that was much higher than the city of Hartford overall. The city of Hartford's overall property value increase is down there at the bottom at 11.7%. So each of the 3 CDC focus areas vastly outperformed the city of Hartford overall. The property value increases in the Sina area are particularly striking to me because if we look at the rest of Southern Hartford, which includes census tract 5026 down to census tract 5023, that south end census tract there. Those ones are the comparison tracts in Southern Hartford. The highest property value increase outside of the Sina area was in that 5026 Berry Square neighborhood census tract. And that was about a 20% change in property value. So the Sina area is vastly outperformed the rest of Southern Hartford in terms of property value increases. So it's clear that there's something different going on in the Sina area than the rest of Southern Hartford. And then looking at the comparison between Nina's Asylum Hill census tract there, 5246, and the surrounding area is really interesting. So there are some census tracts around there that are seeing pretty substantial or at least very strong increases in property values. Some of the interesting comparisons to the Nina area for me are, if we look here at the 5245.02 West End census tract there, it's saw the largest decrease in property values out of any of the census tracts in Hartford. So that is the West End area that is north of Farmington Avenue. So generally considered the wealthiest part of Hartford. I mean, they are the highest property values in Hartford, but saw the largest decrease in property values out of anywhere in Hartford. But if you look at the 5042 census tract, that's the West End, mostly south of Farmington Ave. It's performing quite well. And then that Clay Arsenal census tract is really interesting. So I spent a while like, what in the heck happened in that Clay Arsenal census tract there? And one hypothesis there is that there was a school renovation done and completed in 2014 in that neighborhood. And when I look at the Google Street Views for that area, after the school renovation was complete, the houses adjacent to the school, like multiple houses got fixed up. Like there's one street adjacent to the school where like almost all, I won't say almost all, but a good number of those houses saw how improvements were made after the school renovation happened. So that was another tangential finding of this research, was that schools really make a difference in property values. So as some of you know, Sina opened the Learning Corridor in 2000, 2001, early 2000s. So that could definitely be having an impact on the property values around that area as well. But if that really is the reason for that huge increase in property values in Clay Arsenal, that is really interesting. That's a bit tangential, but these are some really interesting things to come up for me when I look at these Hartford median home sale values. So all Sina and Nina areas, though, the focus of this, Sina and Nina areas did outperform the city of Hartford overall. The Sina area vastly outperformed the rest of Southern Hartford. And that area around Asylum Hill, West End, Clay Arsenal, there's some interesting things going on around there for property values. But the Nina area did see strong increases in property values. Man, I could talk about that slide all day. So I live in Hartford too. And so it's just really interesting to me. So I did see some questions come in the chat. I'll look at those at the end there, but really happy to talk more about that slide. So now looking at New Haven, here it's a really different picture. And you can see, looking at this, the difference between the real estate markets in Hartford and New Haven. So as we said before, the property values in the city of New Haven overall increased almost 50% from 2001 to 2019. So already we're looking at a different story from the city of Hartford. But whereas in Hartford, 3 out of 3 of the CDC focus area census tracts saw property values increase faster than the city overall. New Haven, only 1 out of 5 CDC focus area census tracts saw property values increase faster than the city overall. And that is partly due to the fact that the city overall saw such large increases in property values. It's such a high threshold there for property value increases. So the CDC focus areas in New Haven kept up with the state of Connecticut's average property value increases, even though they saw lower property value increases than the city of New Haven's average, possibly due just at least partly to the fact that certain parts of New Haven are seeing such high property value increases. Moving on to street conditions, this research found that there were improvements in street conditions in most of the neighborhoods. So I was looking at street conditions through the Google Maps windshield survey. The types of improvements that I was looking for included continued maintenance of CDC homes, improvements to the exterior or landscaping of homes surrounding the CDC homes, presence of trash, graffiti, etc., and overall appearance of the street and the homes. So there was evidence of improvement in street conditions in the SINA and in all 3 CDC focus areas, but street condition improvements looked different in each area. So spillover effects, which I defined for this purpose as improvements to homes surrounding the CDC improved homes, were the hardest to locate in the SINA area and were more easily identifiable in the NINA and NHS areas. I know there's some folks from SINA here who can possibly comment more on that, but part of my hypothesis for that is that there are more large multifamily homes in the SINA area, which perhaps it's harder to get a spillover effect from a SINA renovated home. If it has large multis on either side, it's going to be harder to see those improvements transferring over to those large multifamily units. But we can chat about that. Really interested to hear what you might think about that. But I'll move on to some more specific examples of this. So one good point to make and a positive point for the CDCs is that almost every home I looked at that was a home that the CDCs had built or renovated was well maintained, even decades after being sold by the CDC. We have an example of a SINA home, or 2 SINA homes here, sold in 2001 and 2002 and shown in 2019 that have continued good maintenance even nearly 2 decades after being sold by SINA. Down there, there's a NINA home on Ashley Street, so shown 6 years after NINA sold it, still maintained in good condition. And then there's an NHS home also down there on the bottom left that was sold in 2004, shown in 2019. Improved landscaping or home maintenance of nearby homes. This is talking about the spillover effects. These spillover effects were easier to locate in the NINA and NHS areas. But with that being said, I do have a photo up here that provides a counterexample to that in the SINA area. And I'll get to that in a second. But down here on the bottom left, that home down there that's boarded up in the bottom left photo was a home that was renovated by NHS, and it's shown completed in 2019 down there on the right. And then the home 2 doors down, you can see got a fresh coat of paint after that house had been fixed up. And the home directly next door, I can't tell if it's so that it got a new tree planted or that there's better maintenance of that tree there, but there's improved landscaping on the home next door there, and there's a fresh coat of paint on the home 2 doors down. So those are the types of spillover effects I was looking at in each of the areas. And I found countless examples of this in the NINA and NHS areas. I was having a harder time locating these types of spillover effects in the SINA area, though I did locate a few. But I was in my office writing about how I was having a harder time finding these spillover effects in the SINA area. And then I went out and I was driving around in the Sina area to take a couple pictures for this project. And I parked my car and got out of my car and went to the turn to take a picture of some Sina homes across the street. And then I noticed that right to my left was this little garden area here and a sidewalk between two large multifamily apartment buildings. And I was like, I was just writing about that these spillover effects are harder to find in the Sina area. And then I'm standing here and I'm standing next to this beautifully maintained garden between these two large multifamily homes. So, you know, we can't say if can credit that to Sina's work, but certainly this is evidence of care for the home and the neighborhood to have this beautiful garden adjacent to this sidewalk here in the Sina area. Alrighty, so getting toward the end of my presentation here, where does this leave us? We should believe in our cities. They do have strengths. They have certainly comparative strengths to other formerly industrial cities. And then also because people live here. And so that's taking something from Alan Malick's book, The Divided City, that we should care about these neighborhoods. We should care about our cities because if for no other reason than because people live here and people matter and therefore these places matter. I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir here and saying that to the folks on this call, but it's not always the general tone of us in Connecticut to think of our cities as being the strongest, but they have strengths and people live here. So, and then considering how to spatially target investments based on desired results is another finding we should keep in mind. If the desired result is to provide better housing opportunities for folks living in the neighborhood, we can do that to some extent without spatial targeting, but in order to get those kind of spillover effects or to make changes at the neighborhood level, we have to consider how much housing we have to rehabilitate in that area to achieve those results. And then thinking about home ownership, and if it is really hard to increase home ownership in our cities, is that the best measure of success? And are we approaching increasing home ownership in the most effective way? That second question I recognize is a huge question. I mean, they're both huge questions. And again, don't have the answers to that, but really worth thinking about. And those numbers really do bring up those questions. Where does improving quality of life for renters and really for all residents of our city's neighborhoods fit in, and how can we measure that? Perhaps looking at street conditions can better get at quality of life for everyone than something like property values, which may be showing the benefit to homeowners more so than everyone living there. Keeping an eye on property value trends, they can indicate where a neighborhood is heading. I have even more comments on the property value trends in Hartford that I realized I didn't say, which is probably a good thing because I can get really off on that. But like, for example, in the West End neighborhood I mentioned, we look at that neighborhood and we think it's, you know, it is one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Hartford. But if we look at the property value trends in that neighborhood, it is concerning. Whereas if we look at a neighborhood like Clay Arsenal, which we wouldn't generally think of as the most stable neighborhood in the city of Hartford, we see huge property value increases in that area. So whereas when we're looking at the physical space of a neighborhood, we're doing our windshield survey, that can tell us the conditions of the neighborhood today. If we're looking at the property value trends, it can perhaps give us an idea of where that neighborhood is trending toward. And then the good news for CDCs to come out of this, the homes that they build and rehabilitate and sell are being maintained. There are at least some spillover effects from the rehabbed homes to other homes on the street, and property values are increasing in CDC focus area neighborhoods generally. Thank you. Many of you are on this call who are on this thank you list. Thank you to the folks at the CDCs who spoke with me for this project, for John Cabral and Andrew at Chaffa for providing me with a lot of the data I used for this. And then many of my colleagues at Trinity who've helped me out in this with project and other projects in many ways. And then questions for you. And I know there's a bunch in the chat that I will now look at. How about, can you give me a second to look at these in the chat? And then actually, since there's so many questions coming in the chat, man, what's the best way to do this? All right, let me look at the questions in the chat and then I'll determine what our steps are going to be for questions. Okay, wow. All right, there's a lot of questions here. So we talked about the vacancy rates.
Gabby, if you would prefer to have folks come off of mute, if you would prefer for folks to come off of mute, we can do it that way as well.
I'm going to take a couple of questions from the chat and then we'll move into having people come off mute. How does that sound? Okay. So let's see. All right, so Brendan Murphy asked, do these projects positively affect low, moderate income and minority access to home ownership? Any correlation to intergenerational wealth transfer for those same and other vulnerable groups? Do they positively affect low, moderate income and and it's so the answer, I think, based on my research, would be in a lot of ways, yes. I mean, there are positive impacts. So the CDCs are selling these homes at below market rate. So for those families that are buying the homes, these are nicer homes than would otherwise be accessible to them. The property value question kind of gets at, in majority minority neighborhoods, property values are typically lower than in majority white neighborhoods. And so if property values are lower or property values are not increasing as fast as they do in other neighborhoods, then that's impacting the wealth of the residents of those neighborhoods. If their property values are declining, that's an evidence of the wealth of the homeowners in that neighborhood declining. So if these projects are increasing property values in the neighborhood, then it is positively impacting the wealth of minority residents. And so based on this research, there is evidence that in at least some of the neighborhoods, there are property value increases higher than what they may have been absent CDC intervention. All right, Miss Leslie here. I live in Hartford. I'm told that it is hard for developers to do condos versus apartments. Why isn't there more support for this, for condos? It would really help the city to have more of a buy-in versus just renters. Very few condos. Sales price is really high for multifamilies. The sales prices here are from CHAFA's database of sale prices by census tract. And so Leslie, if you would like access to that database that I got those from, John or Andrew at CHAFA might be able to give that to you. So, but I would be interested to hear if you have different numbers. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to measure property values, and depending on if you're looking at it in census versus sales values and how you're breaking it down, and you can come up with different numbers there. But the condos question, so my research really didn't look into that. I've heard from some folks that there's not much of a market for condos in Hartford, and so that's the reason for it. But I'm not sure. Yeah, so Leslie, again, so the data in terms of median home sales value, this is coming from CHAFA's database of median home sales values. And that is interesting that it's different than what you're seeing as a realtor. I'd be interested to talk about it, and we can look more into why the CHAFA data is different there. So I did also look at the median home value based on the census data and compared that with the median home sale value data. The census data is slightly different than the median home sale value data, but it reflects the same trends. So because the census data is taking into account the home value of all the homes in the neighborhood, and the census is an estimate, and median home sales is only the homes that were sold, the numbers are slightly different, but the trends in the census data are the same. Like the areas that saw large property value increases are the same in the census. The areas that saw small property value increases are the same, even though the percentages are different. Okay, and so I think I've gone through most of the things in the chat. So if anyone has any further questions, please go ahead and unmute yourself. Questions or comments?
Gabby, I just switched it so folks can unmute. So you should be able to now. If you're not able to, give us a wave maybe, and we can do that for you.
You can also add any questions in the chat or also email me. It is a lot of info to digest. There were some really great questions in the chat here. Also, I will note, so I really want to continue this discussion and continue this research. Like, I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg here. And as we hinted at in some of these questions here, there are a lot of different ways to slice these numbers. And so if you have other databases, other numbers, other ways of looking at these numbers, really happy to continue to look at that. Oh, Erica's saying participants cannot unmute themselves, FYI.
I just gave Abigail permission, so it looks like it's not working. So if you can type in the chat that you want to unmute, we can do that for you. So go ahead, Abigail.
Thanks. Gabby, thanks so much for the interesting presentation. That was, I learned a lot. I have been really fascinated by looking at your use of the Google Maps historical data as compared to present. And I'm just wondering if you can tell me a little bit more about sort of how you identified that methodology and whether you've thought about other applications for it, because it wasn't something I was aware of, and I think it's really fascinating.
How did I come up with that methodology? Great question on that one. I think just being around my very smart colleagues at the Center for Urban and Global Studies, you know, we use Google Street View, Google Maps for a lot of different things. Also, some of my professors at Trinity, like Don Poland, he uses a lot of Google Maps, Google Street View. I think I first learned of the historical Street View from David Lukens. So that really, I have to credit all of my smart colleagues at Trinity for introducing me to some of the other features on Google Maps. Other applications there are unlimited applications for what you can do in Google Maps. Like, so those maps also of Hartford and New Haven, I made on Google My Maps, which I've been trying to learn GIS for years and just have never really like dedicated the time to master it. Sorry, it's getting a little dark. And Google My Maps is like a beginner's version of GIS. And basically there are so many different research projects you can do in Google's mapping applications. It's quite amazing. So Sheila asked in the chat, anything on why CDCs do not continue to renovate more homes in the same neighborhood? Well, a lot of the CDCs do. SINA and NINA are focusing largely in the same neighborhood over periods of time. The CDCs that are not doing the spatial targeting, I think sometimes it's due to, I don't want to say convenience, but in some ways I would say convenience of like they acquire a property from the city or this land is vacant here. And so it's like they acquire properties more based on convenience than of a strategy focused on spatial targeting. I think a lot of CDCs are aware of that importance of spatial targeting, but there are some who it's not a priority to cluster investments. Don't want to name any names on this, but for some, I think it's just that it's not the focus of their model. Aaron says condos are disfavored by developers in Connecticut urban centers because of the way they are treated in property tax assessment. Very interesting. Thank you, Aaron. Yeah, I would be interested to hear more about these condos too. I mean, I've heard a couple explanations for that. That's the first time hearing this. I guess more commonly I've heard that there's just not as much of a market for it, but not my focus area there. So if you can't unmute yourself, you can put in the chat that you want to be unmuted. I have unmuting powers too, or you can just type your question in the chat. I think we have time for a few more questions. Also happy to chat about any future research questions that you're interested in having Trinity students work on. My colleague Erica Crowley is the director of community learning, and she's on here. And we would love to hear about your ideas and maybe work on some more research questions that weren't addressed here as well.
Gabby, can you share maybe in the chat how folks can contact you? I see Melvin has a comment, but maybe you can share that.
My email's on that slide there, but I'll put my email in the chat. And also, Erica, if you don't mind, I'm going to put your email in here too. If you have, she's the director of community learning and for research projects. You know, she's your person. Okay, Melvin, Melvin's saying here, increasing homeownership rates is not the only nor the main metric we use at SINA to measure success, but the findings are nevertheless compelling. Data must come from the census tracts, whereas we're looking at smaller geographies. Yes, absolutely. That's a really good point. So I was looking at census tracts for this. However, when you look at smaller geographies, it is easier to see the impacts of certain kinds of investment at smaller geographies. And Melvin, I would really love to talk with you more about this at some point and to see your data at the smaller geographies, which it is, you know, census tracts have advantages and disadvantages. I mean, the advantage is kind of the ease of accessing data at the census tract level. Disadvantages, sometimes it's not precise enough to measure those indicators. And so I know that so the folks at the CDCs, like you, Melvin, at SINA, you all have a much more nuanced understanding than like folks looking at it from the outside. And so like, for instance, when I'm talking with folks, you know, more looking from the outside in at Trinity or in the city or so on, the main focus I hear is like these programs, the main goal is homeownership. Like we want to increase homeownership. So even if we have a more nuanced understanding of what it means, like homeownership is still thought of as like the holy grail of those metrics. And Aaron is saying NHS has recently begun doing new construction projects instead of just rehab renovations. Does that change is that change in approach based on any data they shared with you? I'm not sure. I'm not sure on that one. Erica says, can you talk more about the quality of life for renters improvements and impact on home values? Yeah, so the home ownership rate in Hartford overall is low. The majority of the city is renters. And so we always want to be considering like, how can we measure the quality of life for renters and not just homeowners? Oh, all right, Melvin, I'll unmute you in just a second. Erica, if you don't mind, I'm going to unmute Melvin and then I'll get back to your comment in just a second. Melvin, you're good. You should be unmuted if you want to say anything. Oh, wait, no, you're not. Oh, wait, I can't do it. Chelsea, can you do Melvin?
I'm trying. It's like everyone's lost all powers to unmute people.
Oh, that's so strange. All right. Well, thanks, Melvin. Thank you so much for coming, and let's definitely chat. I have to admit it's a little bit nerve-wracking to present this research to you because I know you all have so much that you know, and I'm just like trying to, you know, grapple with it myself. So yeah, really, really thank you for coming, and let's talk more.
Actually, I'm unmuted now and I can say great work. So no, I just want to say great work. Thank you so much. We definitely can talk offline, but the main thing is really well researched, and the spillover effects is really, yeah, I wouldn't have expected that finding comparatively. And so I definitely want to maybe have some ideas about that and talk to other folks about that, because but we are firmly committed on a path to developing home ownership in the neighborhood. And the questions that you raise about rental housing are fascinating, I think. But one of the realities for us is that a lot of the rental housing in our neighborhood is income restricted, and so we want to develop in a way that brings in more diverse income mix as well. But the main message is great work. Thank you. Yes,
thank you so much, Melvin. And I'll say I think most of you know, but I'll say for anyone who doesn't know, Melvin is the executive director at SINA. And so thank you so much for bringing that up, Melvin. Yeah, majority of the housing, I believe, or rental housing in the SINA area is income restricted. And so going to Erica's point, I'll talk specifically about one approach that I have recently become aware of and I'm kind of fascinated by in terms of increasing quality of life for everyone while not further restricting the income, not imposing further income restrictions on the neighborhood. So many of you probably know Don Poland. I'm taking his urban planning class this semester at Trinity right now. And he worked on he was the executive director of a nonprofit in Hartford for some years in the 2000s called Neighborhoods of Hartford, Inc. And it's based on the Healthy Neighborhoods model. And it focuses on improving quality of life in the neighborhood by encouraging residents of the neighborhood to invest in their neighborhood, to improve their neighborhood. So they did things like They provided loans to homeowners in the neighborhoods to fix up and maintain their homes. They also helped homeowners who could access public funds to access funds to get loans to fix up their homes. So they had that loan program if homeowners were interested in fixing up their homes, and they would hold their hand throughout the process and help them oversee the contractors to make sure folks weren't getting ripped off, and they were improving landscaping in the neighborhoods. And so Don has a full book manuscript that he wrote and put online about this strategy and how it worked in Hartford. And I can see if I can find it quickly to put the link in here, but that's one strategy I've recently become aware of that I'm really fascinated by in terms of increasing quality of life for everyone in the neighborhoods, and without further restricting the rental housing in the neighborhood, like Melvin was saying, because it already has a lot of income restrictions on the rental housing in the neighborhood. Let me see quickly. So go ahead and type any other questions into the chat here. Let me see if I can find that manuscript of Don Poland's. If I can't find it relatively quickly, then you may have to search for it yourself, but let me take a look here. Okay, I did find the link, so I'll post that in the chat. Oh, I'll stop sharing my screen now. I could have done that a bit ago, I guess. Alrighty, just posted that Don Poland link there. If we have any further questions, I think I can maybe take one more. Yeah.
Gabby, since I can unmute, I just want to say thank you so much, because I know there's probably a lot of people who want to come off mute to say thank you. This is so interesting. You even captivated this little guy for part of this. So just thank you. And I know folks can reach out to you if they have additional questions.
Yes, please. Really, this was really an interesting project and an exercise for me. We have some experts on this call. I just want to acknowledge that, like Melvin, Dean, and other folks on this call know a lot more about this than I do too. But at the same time, we at Trinity really, there's a lot of folks at Trinity interested in these issues. And so if you do have ideas, I know Sean Fitzpatrick teaches a practicum course, and he's, my original idea for this came out of his practicum course. So you too could have a research question, developed out like this if you'd like. We're really interested in these issues and would love to, continue to chat about what might be possible. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Gabby, and thank you everyone for joining. As a reminder, Alan Malik's presentation, keynote presentation tomorrow is at 9:30 a.m. and there is still plenty of time to register, so please do. And we look forward to hopefully seeing many of you on other sessions this week. So thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, bye-bye.